Three, two,
We're
one, let's go.
live.
Oh, sorry. Hey.
Hey, I mean, that's a pretty good intro. Probably
All
one of the
right.
best intros. Let's go.
Yeah.
All right, now I can see you.
Mm-hmm.
Fine.
How are you
Welcome,
hearing me?
everybody.
You can hear me good?
You want to do an introduction? I usually
Sure.
do one doing it, so might as well give you. Hey, look at the cool step ladder right here.
What?
This was my gaming chair like 3 days ago.
Oh, I can't see it on the video screen that I have your
Oh, you
video, but
can't? Yeah, because you're getting my laptop
your
view.
laptop's view.
To my right side is a ladder that I was perched on when I was playing video games because the seat I have right now is a little less comfortable for extended period of times. I will
Oh,
move
good.
it.
You know what's better than that, of course, is going to be the a step ladder. Step ladders are, the epitome of comfort.
I mean, this is like a not a step ladder. It's like one of the stepping stool things where it's like there's got like three rungs and the top part is large enough to put a butt in the seat. So it was
Cool.
it was good. It was a good time.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
you want to do our introduction then?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Eric, and this other person up, down, somewhere in the screen
It's
is
Justin.
Justin. And we are co-founders of Sonic Bloom. And every week we do a little bit of a program where we look at the week's news and try to give a kind of an industry perspective of why this news is important and what effects it might have, over time. And in many ways, it's something that may not make big headlines, but sometimes it's things that for those of us in the industry might have more import than you might give it, at first glance. And we try to dig into why that might be and give sort of an insider's perspective. The other thing that we do is occasionally try to give a little bit of a shine a light on some of the game audio related topics because that's sort of near and dear to our heart as it's sort of core to our company and what we do. And we think it's somewhat of an underserved space in games in terms of, how
I mean,
media
generally, every role and position that is not like major game producer or designer is kind of overlooked. It's kind of like movies where it's just like, these visual effects are awesome. Like there was about 300 people that made that happen. So
yeah, you like the lead art director gets a huge billing and gets accolades, and they deserve it. But so do the 300 other people that made it work.
Yeah,
So, but we try to as some of those people, two of those people who have been on those 300 person teams and whatnot, where we try to provide a little bit of perspective. And to that end, today, Justin, what are the news items that we have on today that we're going to look at?
well, I mean, we will look at a handful of news items, but we're also going to cover the big one, which is Sony was at CES this year and actually kind of brought out the big guns. Not only did they mention like the Sony Vision S, which is their electric car that they showed originally, I think last year, or the year before, to show off like the tech package they offer for electric car manufacturers, but they got enough positive feedback that they're now looking at creating a basically competitor Tesla and selling it, which would bring Sony into the electric car market, which is kind of interesting. But they also took that same opportunity to talk about PSVR2, and it's kind of interesting that they brought it up at CES, and they mentioned PlayStation 5 sales and all that, but the fact that they bring it up there means I think they have a lot of interest in VR platform as a consumer platform, and they're putting quite a bit of development and research into it, as well as their manufacturing capabilities to do a next generation of it. So we'll go over those details. Less about what the tech specs actually are, because basically there's no in helmet processing. There's only the actual visual display and the like bells and whistles they've added onto it. But all those things have a meaning to what future VR games are going to be like. So we're going to look at those features and sort of discuss how it's going to be impacting your next VR experience if Sony sees its, Sony sees their vision come to fruition. So yeah, we'll be talking about that and recapping some of the smaller news topics.
Mm-hmm.
Do we wanna carry on to the news?
Dive right into those news topics?
Yeah, why don't you get the first one?
All right, the first one that we've got on the billet today is that E3 is going to be E3 2022 this year and theoretically June. They are going full virtual again. COVID, especially with the latest Omicron surge, which we are smack dab in the middle of, as far as we know. They just made the call and said, "No, we're not playing this game this year. We're virtual again."
Yep. What's interesting about this whole thing, that's probably the most notable, is that this time last year, they were going full in on not being virtual, and they made the switch closer to the deadline, or closer to their actual show date.
Yeah.
This year, they're calling it very, very early.
Yep.
And it's not entirely clear if it actually is COVID or it's related to the fact, or they're using COVID as a convenient scapegoat. Basically saying that the popularity and what E3 has become may have sort of forced them to rethink the strategy and what E3s are now and possibly in the future. And the virtual platform is maybe the most beneficial to the entire industry for a lot of reasons that we could go into, but not least of which are that Nintendo and Sony had already pulled out of the show, and were doing their own virtual events. Microsoft had continued to do it, seeing the opportunity to be the one major console manufacturer and publisher on the show floor. That wasn't a third party, at least. So they were seizing on that. But yeah, I mean, having your two biggest publishers, or at least first party publishers, abandoning the platform was not good signs for E3 in the first place. So them sort of moving virtually and calling it this early is a little suspicious. I mean, it's a right call, but it also may speak to other issues that E3 was having prior to COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're somewhat looking at here is, the E3, when E3 started, it was the only game around, right? You couldn't
consumer, especially.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for games as a platform, but you as a general gamer could not go to the conference. You had to show some kind of industry credential. Even into the mid 2000s, right before they changed the format and then famously went back. Before that whole kerfuffle, you had to be press or work at a distributor like GameStop or Electronics Boutique, whatever. If you could show that type of thing, you could go. And the show was for people to do magazine write-ups. We don't really need that these days, right?
Well, magazine write-ups and a lot of holiday prep for getting shelf deals with Walmart or Target, so that they would stock your game, or you could buy the shelf space for your game. And that was all set up during E3. So it was really industry focused in the sense that it was industry wheeling and dealing, but consumer facing.
And I will say that what you just spoke about there actually happened in a part of the conference that no one ever saw in magazines or anything. In the LA Convention Center, there was actually a top floor and a bottom floor. And in the top floor, that's where they have all the big, extravagant booths with all of the effects and lights and sounds. And they're handing you Advil and ibuprofen, or I guess those are the same thing, but aspirin and ibuprofen packets, because they know you're going to walk out of there with a headache from all the noise. If you went downstairs instead, though, it's just a sea of these kind of temporary office spaces where it's just like a fabric wall, hard with carpeting on the wall, but then they have what's it called? Your company has a little nameplate and a location, and you go in and there's maybe a waiting room, and then you have an office room in there, and that's where those deals happen. It's very quiet. It's reasonable. There aren't big showcases happening down there. It's all about business. Which is, that's not something that the magazines or videos online would show you. The thing that made E3 really big and popular, at least for the consumer side of things, for you and I, as gamers, was that bigger thing. And in the years since then, in recent years, we've had all the PAX conferences show up, which are direct to consumer. Pre-release games are showing up there, and you also have like the big one in what was it? Europe. I think it's Gamescom.
Yeah, Gamescom.
Yeah, like that thing is massive, and it is definitely consumer oriented, and a lot of places do their big announcements at these other conferences. So E3 now has a lot of competition in that space, and I think probably what they're seeing is, especially with COVID being a thing, making everyone hesitant, that like if they can get all this stuff to be a focused online organized event, then their overhead goes down. They don't have to pay all the fees to the LA Convention Center and all the hotels and everything. They can kind of keep it more down. I assume that there's a lot of business that is going into this decision on their behalf.
Right. And plus, I think like it's nailing down what the purpose of it is like the big showcase pre-winter or pre-fall like games release season, giving the opportunity for basically for publishers to show off what they're going to be interested in, or like what they're going to be trying to provide interest towards the games that they want to release. And another thing that you've seen like E3 fall away from is like usually E3 was a place where you would get like the like 1 to 3 year plan from the major like from the first parties. So Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft would be like, here's what you can look forward to as an owner of this console. And if you're not an owner, here's what you can look forward to if you buy one. And that's totally been removed with the prevalence of them doing their own press conferences, which make a lot more sense for them because they get to book their own time. They get to have more control over their presentations. If it's pre-recorded, there's not as many like stage gaffes that would make the headlines and sometimes like undermine your entire talking point. Like all that stuff, they have way more control over. And now that Sony and Nintendo are doing it, Microsoft to some degree, now you saw like EA did that this year. EA did like their summer presentation. So I mean for E3, it's not like a good turn of events that keep its relevance the same as it was in the 2000s when it was like the game event that you really tuned into to see what was the future of gaming was. Now it's just sort of like what's up for fall.
Right. Right. And like as you said, the major platform holders kind of stopped doing that, and their replacement has been Nintendo Direct, the Sony State of Play, Microsoft, whatever Microsoft calls theirs, I don't remember.
Microsoft hasn't really done
their videos, just fall update or whatever
they were still doing E3, and I think they may need to find a replacement at this point.
Yeah, and they have been doing occasional videos where they're like, okay, here's upcoming games for Xbox, spring 2021 video. Okay, it's just dated, but those things even still aren't giving you the full here's what you can expect over 3 years or whatever. It's here's what's coming up in the next 3 to 6 months, and they can tease things that are a little further out, but this is giving them far more control over their marketing strategy instead of having to do everything in one point of the year. Right back in magazines, when magazines were the distribution method, you get like one a month, and for subscription magazines, and E3 and the June, July issues would be chock full of like mega issues with tons of news about all this stuff, and then there'd be some fall off with some analysis coming. But then after that, it was mostly like, okay, coming up is 1 or 2 games. The editors got to pick which games they would push forward. And now that doesn't matter, right? You can just go to YouTube and share things. These videos are coming out at you from Facebook, Twitter. Like your news feeds on your cell phones. It's everywhere, and they can control when this happens, which for them as companies is way more attractive than having to like align at a specific time every year with everybody else.
Yeah. And basically one-upsmanship, trying to get your biggest announcement, your biggest showcase, and your biggest stage event just to get people to pay attention to you more than the other guy. So it's, yeah, I mean, I think it's not a good sign for E3, but you know, I think it's a good sign for publishers, or a good thing for publishers, because there's still events that can get you focused around your audience, like Gamescom, like PAX, and events like E3, which weren't focused around the audience except for the media coverage, which now they can control a lot more. Like the value of E3 as a product is, or as a showcase, is just waned, and now, you know, we may see the collapse of E3 as a showy event, and instead we get like a wave of summer live streams from the top developers.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next topic, because I think we beat this one into the ground. Take-Two announced this week that they are buying Zynga for over $11 billion, which is nuts. Zynga used to be like a really big name in mobile gaming because of things like Words with Friends and a handful of other, like a handful of other casual games. But they've steadily built up this empire of not the biggest game, but games that are big enough that they have a lot of the attention, or like enough attention, and churn money for them. And apparently the valuation of them is $11 billion. How this fits into Take-Two's portfolio, I don't entirely know. It's kind of a strange play for them, because most of their acquisitions and most of their publishing is focused around console games and not around mobile games. There are like a handful of them, like obviously Grand Theft Auto has made it to mobile, but this one's a little strange because it's very much mobile development and less of your like serious game and more of your quick cash in and all that stuff. So I don't know. What's your read on it, Eric?
You know, I was trying to think, what the heck could Take-Two be getting out of this, right? Because you know, the some of the analysis that was done in the Reuters article, which kind of was our main source for this news item, you know, they call out the fact that Take-Two, or not Take-Two, excuse me, Zynga has had, what is it, it's like falling profits over the last year or so, in this last year. And they were talking about how, you know, Apple's iOS changes, where, you know, the tracking control that users now have and the ability to opt out of certain tracking capabilities for apps has caused their revenues to fall a bunch because they can't track you anymore with their free games. You know, it's like, well, it's okay. What does Take-Two get out of this? They get IP, and they get some know-how, but the thing about the know-how is Zynga is a publisher, and yes, they own studios, but do those studios have a consistent overarching kind of tech backbone that tells them, here's how you do mobile well? Like, the one thought was maybe Take-Two is looking to take some of their bigger IP and do good mobile translations of those, and I don't think that's the approach that they're thinking here. My read on it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Justin, is that what they may be looking for is ad industry know-how. That what we might be seeing going forward is a world, and this may be controversial, it's definitely just my thoughts spewed out. Maybe they're looking for ways to monetize free-to-play games with advertising on, you know, Windows and PC games in general, and then consoles as well, if the platform holders ever come around to allow that type of approach. You know, integrating an advertising database. How do you monetize these people? That's certainly a know-how that Zynga has deep in their core. And that's sort of, to me, like the most obvious big feature that they could be getting as a kind of a way to augment their own business practices.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my read too. It's like, this is an IP grab, but not in their casual mobile game IPs. Although I'm sure those are like nice to haves. I think, yeah, what it is like Zynga's been around in the mobile space, free to play mobile space for an awfully long time, and has developed very mature systems that, know how to pull data and use that data and sell that data for making advertising dollars, and selling that data to advertisers. I could also see very much pulling in advertising information into persistent worlds like GTA Online, and I think that might be the real plays. Like GTA Online, given the enormous success of that game, could very well borrow a lot of the technology and really feed in a lot of advertising and like the little hooks that Zynga's developed over a decade of how to monetize game content in a acceptable way for gamers.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going to take it a step further, just because this has been a conversation of late with Facebook, now Meta, and all the VR platforms, and the sort of forward-looking strategy of all these different platforms, of having the metaverse, or at least a company's version of the metaverse, right? Where Microsoft might have one and Sony might have one. This might be something where Take-Two is literally saying, look, we have some of the know-how for this. We can do major games at scale.
Yeah.
How are we, if we can do our own metaverse or whatever, where we bring people in and they kind of have this separate Take-Two publisher space, right? It's like all the, it's like Disney Plus services, that Netflix, whatever, but on steroids, because it's literally all surrounding. If they can do that, how do we monetize it? This might be them saying, well, now we know how to monetize.
Yeah.
We have the Zynga. So like, it could be an extrapolation, or at least a preparation for that type of future. Again, this is fully speculation and what if thinking. This is not based on any particular insight.
No, I mean, they haven't really outlined, and nor are they. Is there any need to outline why it is that they are interested in buying Zynga and their IP? But
except maybe to their shareholders. But I don't know what their company structure is and who they owe that information to. But
it's just clear that with the massive success of GTA Online, it's not surprising that they'd be looking at ways to monetize that further. You can clearly see that Take-Two, and specifically Rockstar, like, they are not in a rush to change anything. They did RDR2 like 4 years ago now, 3 years ago, and they added the online component to that, or like we have been trying to build that out. But how old is GTA? It's across 3 console generations now, and largely because GTA Online is such a huge success, like why fix something that's not broken? And I think this is important. However, we also know that there's going to be a GTA next, whether or not they call it, they up the number value on it or call it something else, but that will certainly happen. Yeah, whatever it's going to be called. It also stands to be like that's going to be the point in which they try to transition everything over to a new GTA Online service that is updated graphics, but likely has a lot more hooks in it that allow them to monetize better with the platform that is already successful.
Yep.
All right, so let's get into the meat of the conversation. Today we want to talk about PSVR2. We actually did a video on this, I don't know, like 2 months ago, when Sony talked about the controllers for the first time. Yeah. And we kind of broke down all the rumors of what the PSVR2 could mean. It turns out most of the speculation was accurate, which is kind of funny. That's usually not the case. You usually get early speculation and they have like a wish list of stuff that is unreasonable.
It's like, I want, it's stuff that would literally current, RTX 3090s can't even do. Like, right. I want that out of my PS5.
Right. Okay. And for a mass consumer product at that.
Right. At a reasonable price point.
Yeah. And so with the speculation with the PSVR 2, when Sony came to CES this year, it's like 2 weeks ago, and finally said, here's the spec list that you can expect from our piece of hardware, everything was there. Everything that you expected to be there was there. Everything that was speculated, that was reasonable speculation, was there. So we wanted today to go over what those specifications mean, but not so much as like this is how, like, you know, this is how this changes the game or whatever, but it's what can we expect from our experiences? How are those going to change? And the important part here is that mass market is the most important thing to VR right now. VR has been kind of stuck in this niche space, and the closest thing we've gotten to breaking it out is the Quest 2, the Oculus Quest 2, yep. Which is a pretty low-end device, all things considered. It's got great resolution, but it's definitely behind the curve on things like the Vive and things of that nature, which are higher-end devices that go for, you know, north of $500, and then need a high-end computer with them.
That's yeah.
Whereas this, I think Sony's looking at it and fitting in there in the middle, like looking at placing a device that's probably around Quest 2 pricing with the higher features, but requires the PS5, which as of right now, there's 14, 15 million people that already own one that can become early adopters of the platform. So we want to go into what that means for the VR experiences, which have kind of lagged at this point, and what it might mean for the experiences you guys can expect with your next VR game.
Yeah.
So let's dig into. We'll break this out 3 ways. We'll go over the new specs. We'll compare this to the Quest 2. So you have like a baseline about, you know, mass consumer devices, VR devices at least, and how it stacks up against that. And then we'll talk about the experience. So Eric, do you want to start rattling down what Sony revealed about the PSVR2?
Yeah. So, you know, just, do you want me to just like burn through them in a big list?
Burn through them and talk about any ones you want without going into the details that we'll cover later.
Too many details, right? Yeah. So okay, so first we'll attack the kind of the rendering side of things. Yeah, the visor. What's going to be in that? First of all, each eye is going to be, well, there's a 4K combined resolution. You know, that's when you have both eyes, or when you consider both eyes. So each eye in your lens is going to have a 2000 by 2040 resolution, which is high, and you'll hear why when we go into the Quest 2 breakdown. They are OLED with HDR capabilities. So like your, you know, modern phones, they are coming out now. The refresh rate is 90 to 120 hertz, which is, you know, 90 times a second to 120, which is important for VR because the faster you get that refresh, the more realistic things feel. And it comes with eye tracking internally, so that means that they have cameras and sensors internally in the visor that are looking at your pupils to understand where your eye is focused. And that enables a kind of a rendering approach called Foveat Rendering. And it also, I'm not sure if this is caused by the eye tracking, but they do have an expanded field of view, which went from it goes from 100 to 110 degrees in terms of, you know, how field of view is how far to each side can you.
Yeah, it's kind of like the difference between sitting in a regular theater and then sitting in an IMAX theater, especially one that has a curved screen. Yeah, you're getting expanded field of view, so more of your peripheral vision is covered by the image.
Yeah. So then in the helmet itself, like the visor itself, as extra sensors, we have hand position tracking using IR depth sensors. So think kind of Kinect-based depth sensing controls where you can kind of figure out there's something that's going to be looking at your hands. Or was it not Magic Leap, but Leap Motion or whatever that was, that they had those little sensor bar that you could do? I know.
Oh, yeah, there's Leap Motion, which used some sort of, I don't remember what the sensor bar tech was. I thought it might have been like a type of ultrasound.
It's something either that or it was an IR field. I don't remember exactly, but these are things that people in the early days of the Oculus, the original Oculus and dev kit DK2, dev kit 2, people were slapping those onto the outside of it so that they could track, hands in your field of view. They were like doing it themselves.
I think that like the two important things that you track with a helmet is room position, where you are standing within a room. And there's been so many different solutions around this, some really cheap, some really expensive, and the effect is different depending on what you're going for. The other thing too is tracking where your hands are. And again, we've used multiple ways. We've seen multiple ways of doing this. With the PSVR, what they used was the Sony stereo camera, which was an RGB camera, looking at things in stereo, and then using basically controllers that had a light bar on it so that the two stereo images could track exactly where that camera was, or where that thing was in relative 3D space.
Oh, there was
the move controllers, and the PS4 controller had the light bar on it as well, which was there for the same purpose, but it allowed pretty rudimentary and cheap 3D positional tracking as long as you're facing the camera. But of course, this then means that you're facing one direction, and it kind of forces how you play. It constrains it a bit more than some of the other methods of doing it, like the Vive's, what do they call them, lighthouses or something like that?
I don't know the terms.
They had a specific name for them, and I can't remember, but they were basically two different probes that you'd stick in your room that would create a field that you'd cross into, that would kind of give you like a 6-foot space that you can move around in. It didn't matter where you were, which way you're pointing. These things knew where you were, which position you were in while you're playing the game.
Right. So to that end, the new PSVR2 headset does 6-axis positional tracking. So the same type of tracking for orientation that you have in your DualSense and your old DualShocks is in the headset itself. It also, and this is how they're doing their room tracking and orientation, is by having 4 inside-out cameras. So they have cameras pointing away to track your motion of your head relative to the rest of the room, so they can know where you are in the space that you're standing in. Yeah,
it's actually similar to what like modern cars do.
Yep.
With their when they can
lane assist.
Well, not just lane assist, but when they can do you'll see a top-down view of your car and you'll see the space around it. Yep. By stitching together 3 or 4 different camera views that have really wide angles on them to simulate what the 3D space is around you, and it's not that dissimilar from what they're doing with these inside-out cameras.
Yeah, especially more modern electric vehicles like Teslas are loaded with external cameras.
Yeah,
and it's not just like backup cameras or sensors that say, "And a car is coming at you." They're using them to position themselves in the world and have an awareness of what's around.
Yeah.
So it's the same type of thing. The helmet is going to have HD haptic feedback, and it will support positional audio with the PS5's Tempest engine, which is no surprise. We have that outside of VR already.
Yeah, and they did show off the controllers before CS as well.
They did, yeah.
The controllers are kind of interesting. They take some of the best features of everything and kind of combine it. The controllers look not that dissimilar from what other controllers look like, but the tech capabilities of them are, again, 6-axis controls, so 3 positional orientation, not depth, but there is a way of doing that, which they have a ring on the outside of it that has an LED embedded in it that can help the inside out
the cameras.
Yeah, the inside out cameras to track where they are. So basically the camera's looking down at your hands at all, or the helmet's looking down at your hands at all times. You can sort of sense where your hands are, because no one's going to be doing this with the controller where it would mess up the tracking. Everybody has a controller in front of them. Controllers themselves have the same button layout on different hand that you'd expect from a regular controller. Things that they added to it were capacitive touch on your fingers, possibly more than 2, but at the very least the thumb and trigger fingers have capacitive touch, which means that if you're touching them without even pressing them, they know that your fingers are there. So it helps for like grabbing and pinching and making your hands look like you're grabbing stuff in a virtual world without going really in depth where you have like individual figure tracking. And then they also use the HD the sense components of the DualSense, the pressure sensitive triggers, or the feedback triggers, and the HD rumble, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So
the haptic feedback.
Yeah.
Which I will say that I've been impressed with the advances that people have made in HD, or excuse me, in haptic feedback. You know, it started out as rumble, either on or off, or maybe of 3 levels, and now they've gotten a lot better with like how the different vibrations can transmit through the controller into your hands and generate different types of feel. What we don't know from the information dump here from Sony, at least insofar as the helmet, we can kind of get a sense what's going on with the hands because we have controllers. But and I don't know if PSVR1 ever did anything like this, but having the haptics in the helmet, where the engine is for that or engines plural, will probably have a big effect on how that is going to translate into useful input to players.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple like along those lines. We know the controllers have microprocessors in them to handle the HD rumble or the haptics in general. So it wouldn't surprise me that the main board on this, while not having a significant processor for rendering graphics like the Quest does, which has like a full OS, an Android OS system in it, they can get away with co-processors that are pretty small, pretty lightweight, not terribly expensive, that can do things like handling, stitching together the stereo images that they're getting from the inside-out cameras, the 4 of them. Things like taking in haptic controls that may even be responsive to the position of the head. And we'll talk about that in a bit, but there's a bunch of extra processing that may need to be placed in the helmet without having seriously complicated hardware in the visor itself, like you see like with the Quest.
Or, another option that they do have is to have a PSVR similar-esque kind of add-on box.
But they confirm they're definitely not doing that. They're doing a USB-C direct connection, that's it.
Wow. Okay, great.
Yep. So it's just one cord, goes to the PlayStation, plugs into the USB-C connection, and you're free to travel the country in virtual reality.
As long as you have a long enough USB-C cable.
Yeah. Hopefully they have a nice long one in there.
Right. Yeah. Oh God.
All right. So how does this stack up against the Quest? Quest is. Basically, you could call the Quest a last generation version of VR. At the time it was released, which was a couple of years ago, they did up the resolution and a lot of the bigger issues with some of the lower end headsets, which was like low refresh rate, low field of view and resolution per eye.
Yeah.
And they sort of addressed that. Yeah, the field of view on some of the older sets were pretty miserable. This gave it a 90-degree field of view or 89 degrees. They bumped it up to 60 or 90 hertz refresh rate. And the eyepieces themselves, their screens themselves, were bumped nearly to 4K with both eyes combined. It was still a bit shy of that, 1832 by 1920 per eye. Compare that to the 2000 by 2040, which you might go like, oh, those numbers are pretty close. But, the extra resolution and the expanded field of view is actually really important to the immersion and the experience you're getting. Not only that, but also like some of the screen door effects you get with like low resolution screens, especially LCD ones.
Can you explain the screen door effect briefly? Uh-oh. Something caught in the throat.
No, I live in a desert and it's dry enough that your throat gets kind of raspy when you're talking.
You just run out of yeah. Okay.
The screen door effect is the best way you could describe it is if a low enough resolution screen was present and you place your face right up to it, you'd start seeing the individual pixels. And pixels, the way they're laid out, generally, not always, but generally, are in rows, like perfect squared off rows. And when you stick like a VR headset to your face. You're literally looking at a screen, 2 to 3 inches from your face and from your eyes. So, if you have a low resolution screen, the pixel density isn't that strong, and you start actually seeing the individual pixels. A lot of earlier headsets, especially cheaper ones, had this issue for a couple of reasons. One was it was expensive to produce a high definition panel that small, and with the amount of pixel density that you needed to get rid of the screen door effect, and two, computational processing for that sort of demand wasn't there yet. So even if you had a really high resolution screen, you weren't able to render like that. So a lot of the times
you're doing something extremely trivial.
Yeah. So that was the reason why a lot of these things use low resolution screens relative to the proximity you are to the screen, 2 or 3 inches. The 4K OLED, improves on this. We'll talk about that later. So that's the screen door effect. It's really jarring because you're like expecting to see a normal clear picture, and you're just like, I see bars everywhere. It looks like you're viewing things through a screen door, like if you pressed your face up to a screen and we're looking at things. So that is that effect. And the Oculus Quest does still suffer from it, it's just less noticeable. They also include
6-axis style.
Yeah, they saw 6 DOF, which is degrees of freedom.
Yep.
And they basically achieve it by also using gyros and accelerometers. And then they also use 4 inside-out cameras, four cameras that are placed on the top and bottom of the visor that track depth of your hands and the room around you. The cool thing about the Quest, though, and this is kind of like brought about the abandonment of the standalone Quest headset or standalone Oculus headset, was the Quest 2 could, with an optional dongle that I think costs like $70, would allow you to plug directly into a computer, and instead of using the onboard OS, would pass the video signal through from your computer, and it would act more like a traditional VR headset. You're getting the processing power from your computer and not a relatively weak Android chipset.
Right.
All right. So comparing those two, I think it's kind of obvious that Sony is upping the game here. Do you have any specific thoughts on this, Eric?
On upping the game, or just...
Yeah, well, Sony's kind of play here, right? There's clearly a consideration, and with the PSVR original, the specs of the PSVR and the Quest were kind of on par with each other. And market-wise, they compete in a very similar space, which is consumer-focused VR experiences. Of course, Sony requires you to have the PS4 with the PSVR 1, at least. The PS4 and the headset, which a combined total was much more expensive, but came in much less than like a PC rig that would do the same thing. And the headset itself costs about the same as a Quest 2. So if you had a PS4 already and you were thinking about VR, your options were Quest or PSVR.
Did the PSVR just work on a normal PlayStation, or did it require the PS Pro?
It worked on PS4, PS4 Pro.
Oh, okay. Cool.
The sort of I guess the thing that you had to give up was it was less free from the console. They required a standalone box that helped in visual processing that the PS4 just wasn't really equipped to do. So they had like a coprocessor, and that would attach to the console. Yeah.
So I think just as a high level, and we'll dig into specifics in a bit, but I think at a high level, like market positioning, you spoke a bit about this. My opinion on this is that to take this to a place, a game industry related analogy, Oculus is targeting the Wii audience while Sony is targeting the Xbox 360 audience. Like, those were in the same generation, the Wii and the Xbox 360. And the Xbox 360 was huge in core gamers. And the Wii was huge amongst casual gamers and everybody else who's like, oh, what's this waggle video game thing? I hear Wii Sports is cool. And part of what makes me say that is that Facebook's or Meta's marketing for the Oculus 2, if you look at the videos they put out, they showcase a lot of people, kind of middle-aged adults, and they show video of the adult moving around and doing these things. And most of the experiences that they show fall into two categories, sort of dance and workout. They're not showcasing much in it. They do have some games that they show, like, look, it does games, but it's more definitely oriented towards like the sort of the rhythm workout style thing, Beat Saber, those types of experiences, which do very well, and there are quite a number of them on the Oculus store. I suspect that what Sony is going for is more like be Batman, right? Like they're play in the Star Wars universe. Yeah. We want that more cinematic, more premium feel of experience. And we know that the people who are buying our core console, which is a required element, are willing to spend money for that type of experience, which sets it apart from the more mass consumer, like, you need nothing but this device and right. you can play. Whereas for Sony, they're looking at it and say, okay, well, who are the people that own our console? What are the experiences that they're looking for? How can we, possibly expand the desirability of our products by adding this, but also simultaneously serve the built-in audience that exists, and keep them in our ecosystem. And I think, to me, that's where it's a bit more premium than the Quest 2 experience that you get.
Yeah, and I think you certainly see with like the progression of how Oculus has sort of operated as a company, not least of which was getting bought out by Facebook. And now Meta, yeah. But sort of moving away from like the hardcore game experience and moving into we're actually just perfectly happy with these like workout games and things that are novel, and then wanting to have virtual conferencing. And that's what Meta is going after now with the Quest. And they've got the sell into that. But I think Sony's looking at it and saying, we were promised these awesome experiences. Half-Life Alyx was, Valve saying, hey, look, we can produce these really awesome experiences that get around some of the bigger hurdles of VR without totally compromising experiences. They put their best foot forward, and nothing followed after that, right? Like our best VR action games are like Super Hot and Half-Life Alyx, and those games are over 2 years old now. So Sony, I think, is the important thing about this whole thing is Sony saying, look, there's experiences here that we should be getting, and the PC space is too fragmented. Microsoft says they don't want to pursue it. And I think they're seeing an opportunity here, maybe similar to what happened when Nintendo entered the game market, and Atari had sort of flatlined, gaming in general. There's an opportunity here to say there is something here, and we just need to put the right sort of creativity and investment behind it to get us up to the point where VR becomes more mainstream. And I think to add to this, and I've said it before, is that this is one of the areas where Sony stands out above Microsoft. Microsoft has an exceptional, service that they are selling alongside their consoles and even outside their consoles. So how does Sony compare with this? Like, well, they got their first party games and their experiences, but now they might be looking at it and saying, if you want the best VR experience, you have to get a Sony VR headset.
Yeah. And to be fair, Microsoft also has a VR, well, they have an AR headset, which is called the HoloLens, and I think the HoloLens 2. But that is extremely expensive, requires a nice beefy PC, as I understand it, or at least a decent PC, and is not at all marketed to games right now. They're definitely... No,
you talk to anybody at Microsoft, and the broad statement here is that they've abandoned HoloLens as a gaming and entertainment device, and are now focusing mostly on military and industrial application. Which, I mean,
that is huge,
amazing, opportunity there. But it's not what like old Microsoft Xbox team was showing off when they showed the HoloLens and showing Minecraft and all that stuff. Like the sort of experiences that were promised there, I think they've largely abandoned.
And I mean, a lot of that was tech demo stuff and to show off what could be done. Although a lot of those techniques can be used in construction industry and all that other stuff. But in terms of being able to do AR stuff, like we can do that with our iDevices and our Android phones and whatever. All of them have AR Kit or AR Core built in, and they're good enough where if you want to play a game in AR, you can just point your mobile device at something and have a little Minecraft scene going on in there. You don't need a big expensive headset for that, and it certainly doesn't. I'm not sure it makes any sense for Microsoft to connect and tether you in an AR space to your Xbox console. Like that doesn't really sound terribly appealing. But if you're, it's different for a VR situation when you put the goggles on, the world around you disappears and you are transported into this whole other 3D space.
Yeah. So I think like the bottom line here is that Sony is sort of pursuing this type of device and being the only major entertainment company that has the funds to back it is an extremely good thing, at least for if you're a VR fan. And it's sort of like technology fans, like I want to see what the next thing is. Because they've invested heavily, and they didn't just say like, hey, we can get a cheap device out there. They're getting a device out there that has features that I think are necessary for taking VR into the next space. And especially if you're trying to, and by next space, I mean like the next generation of VR. And I think part of it too is getting around some of the bigger issues with VR, which is motion sickness and nausea that a lot of people are experiencing. And there are rumors and suggestions that the sort of tech that they're implementing with this have ways to mitigate and make the experience a lot less jarring for people and more pleasant for casual and hardcore gaming.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about why some of these components are as important. Like what do these higher end components mean to the experience that you can expect? Like why is an OLED panel such an amazing upgrade over an LCD panel? Why it's the high refresh rate? So let's talk about those things. Eric, do you want to talk about OLED and why the importance of OLED?
I'll happily talk about OLED because it was one of the things that I was super pumped when I finally upgraded my phone and finally upgraded my TV. Was the true blacks, right? So the way an LCD panel works is basically you have either one or many regional or whatever, effectively big LED lights in the back plane of the television, and those have to push light through as evenly as possible. Sometimes you get edges where they're not as clean or whatever, but they have to push that light through into the through a series of
filters,
like the filters, right, which is your pixels, and they have different colors on them and how they're flipped. That's the LCD part. So you have LED lights backing an LCD plane, and then that light pushes through, and that's the light that hits your eye is the filtered light that has been adjusted by those the filters to get you the colors. Cool. OLED sort of combines those two things where each pixel is self-illuminated. So if you simply turn off the pixel and just don't have it emit light, it's just black. It's just off. And if you try to do that with just standard LCD TVs, you basically try to cover up that pixel as much as possible, but it doesn't stop light bleeding through the edges or leaking from around the sides and in between the cracks between pixels. You still get that thing. That's why when you turn off a TV and you tell it to go black, if you're in a dark room, you can still see things, walk around and you see shadows being cast in your room. There is a ton of light that is coming out. It's actually not black. It is actually a gray light, a dark gray light that you're seeing.
Yeah.
And that's happening in your eyes. And in like the Oculus VR2, if you try to see a black scene, your eyes are still being hit with lots of light. Yeah. With an OLED, however, if they wanted to have a little dot that just went or a circle, right? A small circle that just went through your vision like this, it would literally be like, oh, I'm in a black, empty, dark room, no light coming in. Presumably the headset is going to be like up against your skin and not have cracks in the sides. you'll be dark, like wearing a face mask, and then you'll have just those set of pixels move and turn on. So what that creates in marketing terms is infinite contrast. And I mean, sure,
It's not actually infinite, but yeah, it's pretty
right.
close. It's as close as we can get to like original CRT TVs, which admittedly probably a lot of viewers are not remembering what a CRT actually performed like, but you know, it's the light was on or wasn't on.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have still some weird flickering and dispersal through the screen because of electron beams, but
yeah, but
exciters and whatever.
Basically, you get like 1,000,000 to 1 ratios, light ratios, whereas LCDs at best, well, at least with the older technologies and the technologies that are inside of headsets right now, is you get like 10,000 to 1 ratio, and that's using basically filters on the screen to sort of block white light.
Yeah. So the really nice thing about that is it'll create more sort of authentic world experiences. So if you're in the dark, you're in the dark. Your eyes will feel as though they're in the dark. Instead of, you know, that you're playing a game, you're in this virtual space, it'll feel a little bit more realistic, presumably.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also get the benefit of HDR.
Which means that the lights get even brighter.
Yeah. So it means, well, I'll actually take a step back and say the OLED panels that they're inserting into these seem very closely related to the ones that they put in their cameras, their alpha cameras that have, you know, like these tiny eyepieces, but you're basically getting a 2K resolution for your viewfinder. So this technology itself is capable of displaying HDR. It's capable of giving you like a whatever it is, like 1,000 nit brightness, peak brightness, which in a sealed environment can actually be very bright, and gives you like the dynamic contrast you need when you have your face pressed up against you know, a screen. Basically, it now becomes even more important to be able to see the differences between the bright light that you're seeing there and any of the space between the you know, the bright and the dark. You need to see those details in there, and that usually gets washed out in a non-HDR display. So we're getting both HDR, which is going to give you more realistic visuals because your eyes are high dynamic range as well, and that true black that you only get with OLEDs and certain other visual technologies.
Yep.
The 90, 120 hertz bump, that's good.
Very, very nice. Yeah, for anyone who's played games at a higher resolution, there's that some almost realism that you start to suddenly feel if you have a TV that's capable of 120 hertz and are playing a game that supports either VRR or, you know, 120 hertz output. The experience is I don't want to say it's like game changing, but it definitely feels for certain games like, wow, this is butter. This is so smooth. There's no hitching. This is real life. And, you know, for a VR experience, that is what you're going for. So if you're a game and you can hit frame lock at 120 for that experience, it's going to be something surreal and something special.
Yeah. And to add to that, low frame rates. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're going to say what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Lower frame rates also add to the nausea issue because basically your eyes are refreshing at a much higher frame rate than that, at a much faster rate than 60 frames a second.
Yeah. 90 is considered like basically the bare minimum for making the majority of the population feel okay about it.
Yeah.
60, I'm okay in 60 for a bit.
Yeah, but I mean, like I'm fine at 60 when I'm playing a game away from me, like, you know, I'm sitting on a TV. We watch movies at 30 frames a second, but when you have something strapped to your face and you're, you know, swinging around your head and you're getting delayed reaction to that, it can be it's really disorienting and adds horribly to the motion sickness issue.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's actually also a connection for the sensors, right? Like your sensors have to be updating very quickly to the refresh rate of the sensors have to be in sync with the rest of the pipeline, because the sensor is going to go back to the CPU, feed that information into the console where it a frame is put together and rendered out to you. Like this has to happen very, very, very quickly.
Yeah. But to be fair, like accelerometers and gyros can be refreshing at an extremely fast rate to give positional data.
I don't know what the costs difference is for those things. I'm not sure what, like, for instance, phone hardware these days uses for their accelerometers and whatnot. But I'm pretty sure that the update resolution on the accelerometers, at least in mobile devices, is not at that speed. So like the cheaper stuff may not be able to hit the rates that the PSVR2 will need. So this is one of the spaces where, like, I don't know enough about hardware sensor costs to be able to say that this is an actual source of expense for them. But it is something that I'm sure that they're looking at and saying, we're going to pick the right piece of hardware to match the rest of this pipeline and hit target at 120 hertz.
Right. And a minimum 90 hertz, which, like you said, is the bare minimum you basically need to make a pleasant viewing experience for most people.
Yep.
So let's get into eye tracking and foveated rendering, which I think is the most important thing that they've added to this, which was kind of like the wild card. It was like, will they actually invest in the software and hardware to have cameras pointing at your eyes and sensing where your eyes are? Now, this type of technology is useful in a lot of other places. It's useful in cars. Like this has been implemented in some cars where they can basically look at your eyes and make sure you're A, looking in the right direction, and B, not falling asleep. It's used in cameras all the time. They track where your eyes are, they track where your face is. So this is not crazy technology, but it's not usually, it hasn't been typically included in VR headsets, especially ones that seem to be aimed at a more general consumer. But with this, we get foveated rendering. Do you want to talk about what foveated rendering is and why it's important?
Yeah, sure. So it's especially important here for this, and we'll get into that. But so foveated rendering is the idea of if I know where you're looking at my screen, right? I know the rough area of pixels that you're focused on. That means if you're looking on the left side of the monitor, you're only seeing the right side in your peripherals. And our brains are very good at filling in detail. Our eyes do not see peripherals well. Like, we do not resolve detail. If I'm looking out of the corner of my eye and I'm seeing I have another microphone off on the side of my desk, I know there's actually, if I try to pay attention to that, there is a blob of color over there that my brain is filling in a whole lot of detail because I know that is the microphone. I know what it looks like. I know what all these little, like, bright spots are supposed to be. So I can almost imagine it into being there. This rendering approach takes advantage of that by allowing you to say, okay, I'm going to focus all of your fill rate, right? The detailed pixels, all that pixel data, you have to get into the highest possible resolution space around that the LCD is, the OLED panel is capable of, in that space where your eye is targeted. Outside of that area, you can lower the resolution. You can do, pixels that are much bigger. You can basically treat it as a bigger block. And further away you go, the more kind of macro you can be and not worry about, per pixel shading and doing all of those details, because it sort of washes out and you're not going to tell the difference. You can't. Physically don't have the receptors.
Right. I think you can probably summarize this as saying, like, when you have screens as close as they are in a VR setting, your eyes are physically incapable of resolving the resolution across the entire screen. It's only where your eyes are able to focus on. And in traditional displays, because you have no idea where the eyes are pointing, you have to render the whole screen at full resolution because you don't know where the eyes are. With the foveated rendering approach, as you said, it allows you to take advantage of this and say, we don't need to render everything in the highest detail. We only need to render where your eyes are looking at that time.
Right. And this is huge because not only if I'm not rendering everything at full resolution every time, I have more time in my frame. I can focus my detail work and do all the work that was being done on the sides that no one is going to see. I don't have to do that work. And instead I can use that extra time to fill in the gap around where you are looking. So that gives you the sort of returns you some extra GPU bandwidth to play with when you're rendering stuff, which is really important for a console. And you want this product to last, and be more, be a player in the space for more than a year or 3.
Yeah. And not only that, but the demands of VR are quite extreme. It's why it's sort of only given to the most high-end computers, at least within the last generation. And if you experience PSVR, like the quality of the visuals was a step back from what you'd experience on the console itself. And part of that was because the refresh rates had to be much faster per eye to make it a comfortable experience. And you were rendering at a higher resolution period because you're being asked to render at whatever the 2K resolution was that the PSVR was. Now we're asking up it to 4K and refresh it at a minimum of 90 frames per second. So if you really want fidelity in there, being able to specify like where you want your fidelity to be and ignore rendering the rest of the frame makes it so that your effective rendering like space is like, whatever, a quarter of what the actual total screen space is. Yeah. Right. And that extra bandwidth is important.
It goes a long way in lengthening the, it may cost a little more upfront, but I think overall it will keep the product more attractive for a longer period of time, which allows them to sell more over the lifespan of the console.
And also make something that's competitive with high-end headsets that are currently
more
available.
Premium stuff.
Because as long as they can sort of focus where they want to render time, then they can at least compete with like the higher end sets that don't have Foveat rendering as part of their tech setup.
Yeah, it's a massive. Well, not massive. It is a large increase to cost because of you have cameras on the inside or some other sensors that are doing things. You have to process the information to figure out where they're looking. Sony's probably been working on some APIs for the PlayStation 5 to assist developers in creating engines that can take advantage of the foveated rendering techniques. Doing all that work has cost, not only the hardware but also the software. However, the efficiencies that gains is huge. It has the potential to be very, very large. And
yeah, absolutely. And this, it's going to be, I think, the most important thing, and what I think is really important about Sony doing this is that, sort of like you see in the PC hardware to console hardware, is even though PC hardware tends to be far and away more performant than console hardware, it's still the console that leads the way on ushering in a brand new technology through the PC space. It's not to say there aren't PC developers that are making use of like the bleeding edge of PC rendering, but it's still on the console space where it's like they find efficiencies. They're making use of whatever it is, HDR or ray tracing.
Sure.
And once you start seeing that adopted in the console space, you start seeing it trickle out to more and more games in the PC space. So seeing Sony take an approach where they're going, we want foveated rendering, we know it's important, it's going to be a boon to rendering and getting high resolution visuals on a further set of sets and a further set of hardware, you'll see that ushered into other VR games in the PC space. And I kind of liken this to NVIDIA's approach with their AI assisted DLSS, their AI assisted upscaling. It's like a very simple process, and once you get that, for their hardware, it's a simple process to gain a lot of hardware performance. So you don't have to push things as far to get the sort of high resolution, and high refresh rates that we want, when you can have a neural network figure out how to interpolate frames and expand them with at the rendering cost of like 1080p or whatever it is.
Yep.
So it's a similar sort of boost here that I think is extremely important, and will lead to, I think, just higher quality visual experiences that the Quest has sort of dragged VR into. Like, this is Sony saying, like, no, we're taking this back, and we're going for the highest visual fidelity we can get away with.
Right.
You want to talk about haptic feedback, because this is another important one. It is more important. I think a lot of people's brains go towards, well, like, you got HD rumble in the headset, so that can do things like simulate bullets or heartbeats or blah blah blah, whatever. There's a lot of HD rumble interest here, but on the old rumor list, they had talked about rumble being used as a method to counteract motion sickness. And I think both of you and I, when we talked about it, we were like, I'm not really sure how this works, but this is an interesting approach. And now we've gotten a bit more information on this, and it's basically that galvanic stimulation is a method to prevent motion sickness.
It like helps convince you that the motion is real.
Yeah, basically there's a part of your brain that, when stimulated, gives your brain, like, gives the right information to your brain that says you're moving in a direction. So like, if you're tilting this way, having this part of your brain stimulated tells your brain, hey, you're diving forward, or you're sitting back, or you're moving forward at a speed. What's been hypothesized here is that sensors that are down at the base of the head and having HD, or multiple points in which it can vibrate, can not give you the same sort of galvanic stimulation that like these high-end machines do, which are basically probes directly into the brain that will stimulate it with electronic pulses.
It won't do that? That's
no.
weird.
Yeah. Who knows why?
Yeah.
Like medical device clearance, that sort of thing.
You put on the headset and all these needles just go right through your skull.
Doc Ock style.
Exactly.
But people are suggesting that you can get a proxy to this by using sensor, or by using stimulation by buzzing with really like the sort of high end vibrations you can get from these new HD rumble pieces. So they can kind of target the different part of your head to stimulate the galvanic response, and basically give you a better impression of movement in space without actually moving.
Which is going to be very nice.
At the very least, it will, if it works, and if this is actually the intended use of the haptic feedback, that it could go a long ways to easing how people experience VR and mitigate the motion sickness that you get from, basically the sea legs that you need to earn by using VR.
Yeah, there it may also be, one of those things where, maybe, I'm not sure if we covered this when we last spoke, but like, you imagine you have a situation where you bump your head. You would be bumping your head in the world, but your head just goes right through it because there's actually nothing physical there. But your brain is getting the mixed signals of, I just went through something that might be a little bit nauseating for some people. Yeah. And to at least have some, localized sensation that like there was some resistance there as you hit it, even if it was just like a little boop, then that might actually be enough to help people realize like, oh, there was it is a 3D space. I went through the thing, but at least like it responded the way my like born in the real world, raised in the real world mind expected it to.
Right.
So
like, I'm not quite sure what this experience is going to be like, but I have a feeling it will be the sort of thing where it's like, once they release these things to the public and people start using them, they have the APIs ready for, maybe just the sort of responses you need as you move through space that doesn't need, game developers to create custom solutions for. We may be in this sort of thing where you have to feel this before, to really understand how much better this is than what we've had in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of excited about that because like any game where I was like turning my head this way and moving in a opposite direction, I was just like, oh, I don't like that at all. So if you can get like stimulated in the back of your head that's saying, yeah, you're moving that direction, even if you're looking in this one,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's maybe it won't be as nauseating.
Yeah. Your little that little head jerk that you get when you have the acceleration, your brain shifts to the back of your neck, or what you feel that resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's move on to capacitive buttons. This is kind of like a novel solution to a problem that the PSVR original has, the Quest 2 also has, and that's basically as we've progressed with their VR experiences, a lot of games now rely on hand motions and gestures to interact with stuff. Can you talk about why capacitive buttons are a useful addition to this, and what kind of experience you might be able to expect in games?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I mean, it's another dimension of input to the controller, right? I mean, we've seen with the DualSense, you have the like analog. We've had analog, and it's a 0 to 1, like 100%, 0%, 50%. The game can tell how far down the buttons are. Sony did that back in the PlayStation 2 days with like all of the face buttons, and then reverted it because no one used it. but having the ability to have your finger on the button and then have it know that has a lot of value for your own personal representation of your hands in the game, because now Sony can say, okay, I know your fingers are on, so I can, when I do a rendering of your hands in the world, they're there. If I want you to point at something, which is like you do this, you're taking your finger off the button, and the game can, even if you take it off just a little bit, the game can extrapolate, and it is at least closer to reality when you look down at your hands and you're physically doing this, and
Your avatar is doing the same,
right? Or something even just approximating it. If the hands are stuck and you're doing this, it can be a little bit disorienting. But if at least with those a few fingers being able to make that distinction, it can be pretty impactful.
Plus the old method of doing it was you had to have your buttons depressed or
to
off,
know,
right?
Yeah.
And that was the closest thing you get to. So basically, you would be pinching at all times. And this now lets you do, my hands are closed, but they're not depressing anything, and I have the open. So you get 3 levels of basically interaction with your hands that, as you said, are extremely important to selling that you're in a virtual space when your hands are doing similar things in real world as they are in virtual world. So that extra fidelity opens up the opportunity for how you sort of interact with things. Like you can have your hands moving forward and open and closed, and then depressing further, giving you just like that much more immersion.
Yeah, I imagine while we still don't have representation of legs and the tracking of legs and the ability to have actual 3-dimensional, like I can walk around my room and the game will tell me how I'm doing there and tell me to turn around and walk the other way so I don't walk into a wall. We're not there, and I'm not sure that we ever will be in VR space, but we can totally now with the space, in theory, provided that we've accurately described what the 3D haptics and the visor are for and what they do, like a situation where you're in the mech suit from, say, Aliens 3, right? You can look down in your hands. You're moving the mech suit by doing button presses or whatever. You're expected to be sitting there, and that's the world that it's selling you. The motion of that, your movement there, when the step goes forward, the vibration in the helmet can help sell that experience. And now you're in a world where I can do these things and have that happen, and I'm not getting sick. Driving a car and having stuff go by really fast. We used to be one of those things, like riding a roller coaster, especially for people who are a little bit prone to motion sickness, was awful. Because moving you through 3 space when you're actually standing still is a great way to screw with people.
You disorient them, yeah.
Right. But we know from not ILM, the Imagineers at Disney, that they can sell, with some limited motion that is not the same as a full actual, you were going flying down, a roller coaster. they can sell that experience with just like a platform that moves you around like this and has a limited set of motion.
Yeah.
That's all the like Star Wars experiences, and Universal Studios does it, and like they have all of these things where they just put you in a room with a shaky spot and like have a screen that tells you one thing and some fans that blow at you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think to summarize that is with both the capacitive buttons that give you the extra level of touch plus the haptics in the helmet, I think we can expect a deeper level of immersion that we can get from a consumer focused VR helmet, which I think should be exciting for most people, because the type of games we were getting during the PSVR era were great in the sense that we were seeing, full games that we would have played with a controller being converted to some method of VR.
Right.
Sometimes their controls were compromised, but the experience was, immersion. But we were still lacking the like real, contextual
sort of one-to-one
feel.
Yeah.
The haptics were still just like the three-stage rumble. Now we have HD. We have like triggers that feed back now, and now we have HD in the helmet. And capacitive touch buttons that allow your hand to have extra levels of manipulation in virtual reality, which will be great. I mean, it just means that level of development that people are going to be getting from games is going to be pushed into the PC space as well, for more titles more broadly across the VR spectrum. Everybody should be happy about this, especially if you're fans of VR. So I think the last point of this, and there's no confirmation on this whatsoever, but I have the feeling, is that Sony has positioned himself for a mass market device, or at least as mass market as console gaming gets, and as mass market as the Quest 2 kind of approaches. The PSVR 1, I think, had somewhere between like 12 to 15 million sell through. The Quest 2, I don't know what their numbers are at, but they're now the top selling VR platform, which was
it's not surprising given they hit the mass market consumer price point.
Yeah, $300, which is where Sony was at, but apparently it wasn't enough, and I think the experience was pretty compromised in comparison on the VR2 or the VR that made the Quest a more attractive proposition.
I think the double whammy for the Oculus that made it work. Triple whammy. There were three main things to me as a consumer that I saw like, oh, this makes it reasonable. One is that they got the basic hardware experience. They hit the minimum spec required to get enough people to not be sick, right?
Yeah.
They hit some games, and the LCDs will run at 90 hertz if you have the right game. The screen resolution is high enough that it's not going to make people massively like all the time notice the screen door. If you pay attention, you might notice it, but you can get by without it.
Yeah.
The other two aspects of this were price. They got it to 300 or less. And another one was just, it's mobile. It is not tethered. You can tether it. It doesn't have to be. And that is huge, because now people can bring it to holidays with their family if they are not as COVID conscious, or them and their family are very careful. It's the world we live in. But they can carry it around with them. You can go into a different room if your partner or sibling is kicking you out of the room because they're like, oh my God, go do that somewhere else. You can, like you're not tied to a console or to a TV and standing and doing big dancing moves and about to smash your television
right.
accidentally, right? Like you can go do it outside. Sure. Like I had a friend who showed me the Quest, very early, bought it in 2019 and just brought it over one day. And you can't like that is actually really compelling.
Yeah. And although Sony won't be able to achieve that because you have to be tethered to a PS5, I think they still have they'll have a compelling thing on their hand if they can deliver the experiences. And from every indication, they're working very closely with their third-party developers as well as their first-party developers to start delivering the sort of class of games Sony's known for to the VR experience. And they showed this off too during the CES conference where they showed that Horizon, there's a game within the Horizon world that will be delivered alongside
It starts with an N. I want to say Horizon. Nobody's business.
No, it's something mountain. But I don't remember what the other word was.
Horizon VR. Horizon World? Call of the Mountain.
Call of the Mountain, yeah. So they're delivering.
Yeah.
I mean, they only showed like a 5-second clip of it.
Yeah.
But I think what they were showing is like this is the sort of fidelity you can expect. As with most open world, as with most VR experiences, they're kind of on rails to some degree because there's just not like a great solution for how to move about freely in 3D. But they are. I think Sony's really trying to push this idea of having games that include VR experiences that don't feel any more compromised or not significantly more compromised to experience it in VR as well. So I think the most important aspect is like, where are they able to price in this new helmet? Like, clearly it's a class above Quest.
Yeah.
They need to have the mass market appeal, but they do know that they're dealing with generally a gaming audience that's willing to shell out, $400 or $500 for a console. So, I mean, where do you think they need to price in on this to get it to be competitive and to be maybe take the top spot again from the Quest as the top VR platform?
I don't know that they're going to take it from Quest as the top VR platform. I think they'll set themselves aside, and what they're more likely to do is take infuse the VR player market with more people for the premium style gameplay. So like Quest and people playing Quest are not, I don't think Sony's really targeting them. To me, they're more looking at saying, okay, you have a Vive, and yeah, it's fine. You're tethered to your PC. Like, we're going to have a library of games where or you looked at a Vive and it's too expensive and you don't have the money to buy the high-end PC and the high-end headset, but like, we'll give you that experience at a cheaper price, right? This is, if you already have a Vive, you're probably happy with it, or are already looking at whatever Vive, whatever the next headset's going to be, if you're in that kind of price bracket range. I think that they're looking at this and saying, there's space in here for a middle ground where we can. There's an untapped market of people who want that premium experience. They don't want to work out, and we can offer that too. But like they are the player that enjoys those story-driven kind of narrative experiences.
Yeah.
And this is our bet. If we can do it well and we can sell that like other world experience, that we'll have be able to do that. What are people willing to pay? Well, it's still early in the PS5's lifespan. For now, we'll start it at, my guess is going to be between $500 and $600, and then over time we'll see that come down to more of the mass market appeal. At which point you'll see Quest 2 or Quest 3, Quest 3 or 4 or whatever, depending on how fast Meta puts stuff out. But that's my guess. I'm guessing somewhere between 500 and 600.
Yeah, I mean, I think in order for this to be a success, they have to be between 300 and 400. They can price higher than that, obviously, for early adopters, especially early adopters of PlayStation. But I think that the price point that they have to settle in at by the time they want to sell to the broader PlayStation population, by the time there's a PS5 Slim or whatever, is going to have to be somewhere between 300 and 400. My guess is like nailing that $400 mark is going to be really important.
I would honestly, if they can hit the $400 mark, I think they'll be off to a really good start. The two factors that make me second guess that, because I was originally thinking like $400 seems like a hot point, but part of the problem right now is manufacturing distribution markets are a mess, and we're still in the midst of the chip shortage. So like that, it's just difficult to get all the parts, and everything is expensive right now. So there's that, and then there's the fact that excuse me, like, I don't know what sort of games they have and how they're going to fund those. If Sony's just putting out a whole bunch of money, like what is their loss? If the PSVR initial release is a loss leader in the way that like consoles tend to be, and they try to quickly get to a break-even point, how much is Sony willing to go like in the red? Like, how negative are they willing to go on that sale? I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, there's they can stomach some loss there. I think it's really going to be the question of when they have the amount of experiences that they want to make it an appealing package. Can they head around that $400 mark after all is said and done to be able to say it is something that people can consider above a Quest if they have a PlayStation 5 kicking around. So, we'll see. But I think the most exciting thing about this whole thing is that Sony is really upping the competitiveness here and saying we can make a mass market device that is competitive with Quest 3 or whatever it's going to be, as long as you're a PS5 owner, so that if you're considering a PS5 or a VR experience, you're going to be able to choosing between a Quest and a PSVR. I think they need to make it compelling there. And the sort of technology set that they're putting inside the helmet is, I think, the most exciting thing about the whole thing is that they're really pushing the technology forward and pushing where VR is going to be in this next wave of VR experiences.
Yeah, I mean, on that end, speaking to that, I never bought PSVR original because to me it always felt like a gimmick play. Like they had the Move controllers and they had all these other accessories, and to me it felt a little bit like, cool, I'm gonna get this thing and I'll play these neato experiences, but they're not full games, or even if they were, that was my perception. I, having done some development on some VR experiences, seeing the quality and, as you said, the screen door effect earlier, that a lot of earlier devices suffered from just by default. I was not really excited about what it was going to take to get the PlayStation 4, which was already several years old, never designed with VR in mind, to build an experience that I would find compelling. Right. So I just never got into it. This time, however, not only did Sony have the opportunity to build a PS5 with VR in mind, they have basically gone, it seems as though they've doubled down on the technology that they're building into the PSVR2 and are serious about it. And that's right. now I'm like, okay, now I'm interested.
I mean, and I think it goes to show too how much they're invested in this idea,
right?
By how early into the PS5's lifespan that they're like, no, we're thinking PSVR or VR as a platform. So yeah, I mean, PSVR original was very compromised in its control mechanisms, in its sensing mechanisms. Like, they took shortcuts everywhere to get something that worked, and it kind of feels a lot like Move controls in the PS2 era. Like, they're just like, here's a really simple camera that can do low resolution video feeds, and we're just going to use contrasting to figure out where you are. And the experiences were very, very compromised. It always felt more like a toy. And to some degree, I think the original PSVR was a toy, but had some pretty incredible software behind it. And so now we're looking at PSVR2, where they actually took it seriously. They thought about it when they were making the PS5. What kind of experience are they going to be able to deliver? And, if PSVR is half of what the PSVR2 could be, then I think there's a lot to look forward to. And I'm way more interested in a VR2 experience than I was in the VR1.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it for today. Thanks anybody for tuning in and listening to us talk about the game industry and virtual reality. Hope you enjoyed it. We're on every day at 6, or not every day, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time on both YouTube and Twitch. So we'll hopefully see you next week.
Yeah.